Well, it seems all week people have been performing a post-mortem on the Liberal Party as though it were already dead, and anyone who believes in conservatism is some kind of dinosaur. Now, of course, all comes after the opposition lost the Aston by-election in Victoria last week. Brand Liberal, it's all we've heard about. The inference being, of course, that the Liberal Party needs to pull itself further to the left to capture the youths and whoever else is voting for the Labor Party. Now, the Liberals who have been pushing this, and I'll get to them in a moment, may want to take notice of the fact that Labor is saying exactly the same thing. They need to ask themselves, would Labor really advocate for the Liberal Party to move further to the left if they thought it would make them more electable? Labor doesn't want you to be more electable, they're goading you. Case in point is Education Minister Jason Clare on Sunrise this morning.
Really disappointing that the Liberal Party have decided to walk away from this. The Liberal Party has lost a good man in Ken Wyatt. The sad fact is the Liberal Party under Peter Dutton now looks more like Pauline Hanson than Robert Menzies.
Now, Clare is one of the government's best performers. He speaks well, he's across his brief. I think he's a potential future leader of the Labor Party. But all this rhetoric about the Liberal Party moving too far to the right because they've resolved not to support the voice to Parliament is just total bunkum. I mean, there is nothing extreme about not believing in dividing people by race in the Constitution. There's nothing wrong with saying that is not fair and just. Equality and freedom are long-time Liberal values, and this decision fits entirely within that. In fact, it was a coalition government, the Harold Holt government, in 1967, that asked Australians whether or not race should be removed from the Constitution and that Aboriginal people should be included in the counting of the population. A Liberal and Country Party government. And that referendum passed with a 90.77% majority. Whenever anyone says Australia is a racist country, you should tell them that figure. Until that point, the Constitution had allowed for the creation of laws relating to any race except Aboriginal people, which essentially meant their welfare and prosperity was no concern or responsibility of the federal government. By removing those words, it made Aboriginal affairs a legitimate government portfolio and allowed us as a country to make practical decisions about the Aboriginal population. And counting them in the population, of course, gave the most basic human recognition they always deserved. Again, that was a Liberal and Country Party government, not a Labor government. And need we also mention that the White Australia policy was dismantled by the Menzies and Holt governments, and Gough Whitlam was just left to finish it off. Anyway, I digress. The point is that keeping race out of the Constitution has long been in the Liberal Party's DNA. Their announcement this week was not too far to the right, as though the Liberal Party had lost its way. It was entirely in keeping with their historic principles. The Labor Party wants the Liberal Party to come further to the left because it would make them harder to distinguish, which when you've presided over rising interest rates, massive inflation and terrible cost of living, well, sort of helps make the exercise of being re-elected a little easier because there's no obvious alternative. Now, I played for you last night the comments of Tasmanian Liberal MP Bridget Archer, a woman who has voted against her party 27 times since she was elected to federal parliament in 2019. She believes the Libs have abandoned their traditional values and she's trying to hold the fort. Here's a reminder of what she said.
I stay because I know that I am not the only person that thinks that way. And I stay because I think the Liberal Party is at a crossroads, and for people like me, that means that there's a decision between either walking away and leaving them to it, if you like, or fighting for what I believe the Liberal Party used to be.
And it sounds kind of similar to what Simon Birmingham, the leader of the opposition in the Senate, wrote this week. These were some of his words in The Age, quote, "The perceptions of intolerance created by some hasn't just cost the votes of those who feel judged, it has hurt the Liberal Party among all people who reject nastiness or divisiveness." We must be the party of inclusion in which all families who contribute and aspire see relevance. Now, if they're just perceptions, as Birmingham first writes, then surely you should just start selling the reality. The Liberal Party isn't a party of intolerance, and it never has been. It's always been a party of freedom. But then he goes on to say the Libs have been rejected by people who don't like nastiness and divisiveness, and that it must be a party of inclusion. What part of the Liberal policy platform does Birmingham think is nasty or divisive? And what's with all this talk of inclusion? I mean, that is language that is used by the left to infer that others are into exclusion, which is just complete nonsense. He then goes on to say, quote, "After decades of confused messaging, the modern Liberal Party should, without qualification, acknowledge the need for Australia to play its role, a leading role, in conserving our planet by reducing global emissions. We cannot and should not outgreen the Greens, but we should embrace both scientific evidence and mainstream opinion." Again, he's talking about making the party Labor light. If you want to win elections, you have to present an alternative. And when power bills and petrol prices are going up because of green policies pushed by Labor, you should be fighting back. Why do you think Labor lost the federal election in 2019? It was on the basis of green climate change policies that would have cost the jobs of traditional Labor voters. If you want to win elections, you have to stand for something. And by the way, the numbers aren't as bad for the Liberal Party as some would have you believe. The Coalition's primary vote went backwards at the federal election last year, as it does when you lose government, but so did Labor's primary. They were elected to government on the lowest primary vote in Australian history. At the New South Wales state election last month, Labor managed to gain a 6% swing on the two-party preferred, which gave them 54% of the vote, but they still fell 2 seats short of a majority. It certainly wasn't the landslide some said it would be. In Aston, the Victorian Liberals had just tried to expel a woman from their party because she spoke at a rally in support of women that was later hijacked by neo-Nazis. Moderate Liberal leader John Pesutto's efforts to expel Moira Deeming, which failed and forced him into a compromise suspension deal, made the Victorian branch of the Liberal Party look like a rabble. And that was caused by the pursuit of what Birmingham and Archer want the Liberal Party to be. Didn't do much good for you in Aston, did it? And just look around the world. Right-wing parties are on the rise. Italy, Sweden, Finland during the week. They're on the rise in response to woke governments asserting their agenda. But the difference in Australia is we've just had a decade of coalition government. We haven't yet reached the point where the backlash to the woke has gone nationwide. But that day will come. Australian politics is cyclical. The Labor Party was supposed to have taken over the country when Kevin Rudd won in 2007. There were Labor state governments all over the shop, but that soon turned. If the coalition is to win back government, it will be done in places like Western Sydney. And I can tell you, they're not into woke social engineering agendas out there. They are aspirational people, many of them migrants, who want jobs for themselves, opportunities and a good education for their kids, and a house to own. They're people who believe in traditional values and a fair go. Liberal values. Principles and belief will ultimately win the day. And Dutton this week showed that is what he wants to do with the Liberal Party. But if others had their way, the Libs would almost certainly be dead forever.